House, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. A reminder, please, if people could switch their phones and laptops, etc., to silent. Toilets are located in the basement. I think you've all been here before, but the lift is at the end of the corridor there. We need to go down one level. There are no fire alarm tests planned for today. So if the alarm does sound, we will need to evacuate the building following the green emergency exit signs, either through that door or the door here and then out of the building around onto the former tennis courts, I think. So an agenda for today was published last week. We're dealing with matters 9 and 10. I hadn't intended them to be separate sessions, meaning we had the flexibility to deal with both this morning, which I envisage should be possible. Is that? I mean, it wasn't stated to be that we'd start in the afternoon. Is that okay from the council's point of view?
We think it should be okay. We do have an external consultant, Michael Bullock, coming.
Yes.
He is scheduled to be here this morning, but he's not here yet.
Right. Okay.
But can we just have a look at math and maybe just have a 15-minute break between the matters?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, what I would plan to do, we'll deal with matter 9. We'll then have an adjournment. And then we can decide. I mean, it doesn't really matter all that much to me, but for some people who may not want to, I don't know if anyone's intending to stay from the matter 9 participants to this afternoon. So, sorry, to the matter 10. I think Alder Maston, you're here for matter 10, aren't you, primarily? And then on. So it would suit you, presumably, to go into it and deal with matter 10 this morning. Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, that's what we'll assume we'll do, unless your consultant has assumed something different, in which case we'll have to think about it. Okay, so that's that. But just a reminder that the purpose of the examination is to help me to decide if the plan is sound and legally compliant. If it's not, how it can be modified to ensure that it is. So this session will take the form of a structured discussion of the agenda items. I'll start with some questions to the council. We'll hear the responses to those, and then I'll invite contributions from others. If you do wish to speak at any time, please just put your nameplate up on end vertically, and I'll bring you in at an appropriate time. And then when you speak, can you put the microphone on? Ensure that it's at a reasonable height and distance from you so that it picks up your voice. Modifications have been proposed to the plan during the examination by the council. What was a comprehensive list just before the hearing started on the 2nd of May was in exam 23. There have been subsequent modifications proposed by the council in response to my action points and discussions at some of the earlier hearing sessions. I don't think any of those relate. There aren't all that many modifications in exam 23 relating to the policies we're talking about this morning. There are for the matter 10, but not for the matter 9 issues, I don't think. And I don't think any of the subsequent ones that have been published since the hearing started are relevant either to matters 9 or 10 from memory. So that's the position there. In terms of action points from last week, they were published yesterday, I think, and they deal with a number of matters for the council to pick up on in the next couple of weeks, I think, or a week or so. Because we're in the pre-election period now, that does constrain certain things, one of which is the sort of announcements or things that I can make public, and presumably it would also constrain the council from making certain decisions or announcing certain things. That being the case, and this would have been the case anyway, actually, usually when the first round of hearing sessions finishes, it's quite common for an inspector to publish a subsequent note setting out any further actions that may be needed. And sometimes they may result in a further hearing session. So the reserve hearing sessions that we have, we're using one of them to pick up a matter that was dealt with back in week 2, the North East Thatcham site. And unless anyone says anything to the contrary, I'm assuming we can still go ahead with those discussions. It's unlikely that I'll be making any announcements about those discussions. Anyway, the long and short of it is, we don't have any other reserve days after the general election. So I think I've asked the council to give some thought to that. So you've come up with one possibility, I think, of when we could have another additional session if we need one in July.
We have, yes. So we've come up with the 23rd of July if it's needed.
Is that Tuesday?
Tuesday, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll liaise with you and Ian, through Ian, the programme officer, and if I think we can probably get that just confirmed this week to make sure that arrangements can be put in place. It'll be a reserve day, so there won't be anything on the agenda for it, but it's there in case we need to pick up anything subsequent to the end of the programmed hearing sessions, including the further North East Thatcham one, and then subsequent to the general election. Hope that's reasonably clear, as clear as it can be for now. One other issue that you mentioned last week, when we were discussing the requirement for housing developers to do heritage impact assessments, you mentioned that you've been working on some potential modifications to policy SP9 and other development management policies relating to heritage assets. We were discussing that tomorrow.
That's right, yes. So further work on that has been done, and we've sent proposed modifications to Ian this morning.
Okay.
They've been agreed
okay.
with.
Well, I'll ask Ian to get those published then, so that they're available for people who are attending tomorrow. That's fine. So I can have a look at that this afternoon, and we can pick that up tomorrow. Any other procedural points or queries before I go around the table? Allow participants to introduce themselves. No, okay. Well, could I start with the council then, please?
Emmeline Lambert, Council for West Berkshire.
Paula Amarelli, West Berkshire Council.
Morning, Cheryl Willett, West Berkshire Council.
Shukri Masserin, West Berkshire Council.
Sophie Crawford, Aldermaston Parish Council.
Peter Tompkins, Emborne Parish Council.
Lucy White for Bradfield College.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. So we'll look now at matter 9, and this deals with a number of development management policies relating to development in the countryside mainly, but some other sort of more detailed topics. I've put at the top of the agenda what was originally matter 9.6, which deals with the sort of general issue of residential development in the countryside, and that's policies DM1 and then DM23 to DM27. So we'll deal with that first, if we could, please. In terms of DM1, I mean, this picks up on an issue that I guess is carried forward from previous plans in West Berkshire, but basically it's premised on the fact that there are settlement boundaries defined in the plan, which we've discussed, both in terms of the principle of that and the strategic approach, where those boundaries are, etc. So that's all understood. So anything that's outside those boundaries, whether it's in one of the smaller settlements that don't have boundaries or in the open countryside, is classified as countryside. So what this policy does is set out a list of types of residential development that may be allowed in the countryside. Now, it doesn't actually cross-refer to other policies, but when I go down that list, most of them are picked up in subsequent DM policies. So I suppose the first question about it is, and then you've got when you get to part H, this is where we've got basically a self-contained policy within DM1, if you see what I mean, about infill development. That doesn't get picked up anywhere else. So the anatomy of this approach is, I think, to set out a comprehensive list of all the types of residential development that may be allowed in the countryside, some of which are then dealt with in further detail. Okay. So I suppose, okay, well, we'll come on to part H later. The other ones, just so I've made a list in the plan, but I'll just go down them. The first one, part A, what's the purpose of that? Sites allocated as part of the development plan. Is that to pick up, I suppose it picks up things like the fact that North East Thatcham, if the boundary, it would be outside the settlement boundary at the moment, and neighbourhood plan sites going forward?
It does, yes.
Yeah, okay. So that's just to be clear about that. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Gypsies and travellers and travelling show people, well, that's policy DM20. I mean, elsewhere in the plan, I think you do cross-refer to specific policies. I was wondering whether this list would be easier if you actually did that and make it clearer.
We did do that.
Right.
At an earlier stage. Funnily enough, we were having this conversation yesterday and we took it out.
Yeah. There's always a problem with cross-referring because it becomes whether are you being comprehensive, but elsewhere you do some. I mean, this seems to me where it's the very specific things that are dealt with by very specific policies. It's not like you're trying to capture a range of issues. It's I don't know. It doesn't particularly matter. But anyway, on the first one, B, it's DM20. Yeah. rural exceptions and first home exceptions, that's DM 16 and 17. These are all things that we'll deal with later today, aren't they? I think. Conversion of redundant disused buildings, DM 24. Rural workers, DM 23. Extension to a replacement existing houses, 26 and 28. Subdivision of existing houses, 27. So they're all things that we'll then subsequently look at. Picking up Bradfield College's point, a general point, is there seems to be another policy, DM 38, that does allow for student and staff accommodation in the countryside in existing residential institutions. In certain circumstances. So I suppose if this is meant to be comprehensive, is that something that's missed off that list that it could refer to staff and student accommodation in existing educational institutions in accordance with policy DM 38 or something to that? That might pick up one of your concerns, I think. So can I just leave that? I mean, do you want to just comment on that?
Well, potentially it could be an exception. I think we were just following what was in the MPPF, and that DM 38 does, with some modifications, we'll probably talk about it tomorrow as well, that DM 38 does allow for staff accommodation in that policy, but we can think about it.
Yeah.
More.
Well, I might just pick up now. Just going back to the NPPF then, this isn't quite the same. I mean, NPPF has got a policy relating to isolated dwellings in the countryside in certain circumstances, but this isn't quite that, is it? Because these aren't necessarily isolated for a start. I mean, I think there's been case law about what isolated means.
Yeah.
So this is more to do with West Berkshire's strategy about settlement boundaries and outside settlement boundaries. So I think it isn't equating it with the NPPF rural housing isolated homes. It's trying to be a comprehensive list in this particular strategy about where there may be some circumstances where new houses will be allowed. So I think that's how I'm seeing it. And it deals with some things like sites for gypsies and travellers, for example, acknowledging that the rural locations might be appropriate for those. So, okay. So DM 38 is potentially is a cross-reference that could be brought in, which would make it clearer that would be brought into this list. I think while we're on that point, it may be helpful for the purposes of tomorrow just to think about what if that would pick up that particular issue in terms of educational institutes in the countryside, leaving aside the particular circumstances of the settlement boundary for Bradfield College. Is it true to say that there are other educational institutes that are in the countryside, either wholly outside settlement boundaries or again straddling like Bradfield?
Yes, mainly I think wholly in the countryside. So we have Pangbourne College, Brockhurst, Marston College. We have quite a few and institutions.
So it's a particular issue.
Yeah.
We'll come on to the detailed wording of that policy tomorrow, because that deals with all types of development that are necessary for those colleges to continue operating effectively whilst protecting the character of the area. I suppose, just to be clear what the main differences are, as I say, leaving aside your particular circumstance because of the settlement boundary, because I think that's unique to Bradfield College, isn't it? But that issue about ensuring that there could be staff or student accommodation in appropriate circumstances where they're needed, that would help in cross-referring into this policy.
Yes, it would certainly help. I think if you look at the wording, there isn't any specific wording within DM 38 as drafted. It's in the supporting text. So that in itself is perhaps an issue.
Yeah, which we can pick that up tomorrow.
Policy doesn't necessarily deal specifically with residential development associated with them. Yeah, as you say, we can come on to that tomorrow.
Yeah.
But then if you take what it says in the supporting text at the moment, it's there saying it's also DM1 is applicable in considering applications for staff accommodation in the countryside in terms of infill. So if you then refer back to the policy DM1 and say, well, what is that telling me that I can do as a college in the countryside in terms of staff accommodation, then the only provision there in the policy for infill is criteria H.
Yes, okay.
And then you come round to, well, what is that telling me that I'm allowed? Well, again, in the circumstances of Bradfield College, but I'm sure we're not alone, that wouldn't apply to Bradfield College because we do have a settlement boundary, and this is for places which have no defined settlement boundary.
Yeah,
So that's
okay.
effectively saying, because we have a settlement boundary, we can't infill in residential development that is beyond that settlement boundary,
Yeah.
even though there are opportunities there. I think I would, where I draw a slight distinction, and I think anything that can be put to tie DM 38 to DM 1 and provide some provision there for staff accommodation would be welcomed. But just looking at it more broadly, DM 1 with, if you look at those criteria, and obviously within the context of the NPPF, the only opportunities to actually achieve a net increase in residential dwellings are E for rural workers, which are obviously specific to those, possibly G through subdivision of existing residential, and H. And as I've set out in my representations and statement too, so there is an acceptance within the NPPF that there can be some development which is well related to existing settlements. And I think in the last session I went to 3, there was an acknowledgement, I think, that the council had sought to define the settlement boundaries very tightly. And, you know, there's 2 different schools of thought, isn't there? You can draw them tightly and perhaps have more flexible policies, we sort of talked about, which allow for something that perhaps goes beyond those settlement boundaries, or you have a looser settlement boundary. Now, if we're dealing with more tightly drawn ones, then that does limit the scope for development within that settlement boundary. So should there be something possibly within this policy which gives scope for additional residential development where it is well related to those settlements that are defined, regardless of whether it is specific to the need of a college or institution.
Okay. Right. Okay, leaving that one aside, can we, I think the way I'd like to deal with this is to deal with part H of this policy on the basis that it is not written with educational institutes in mind, that it's written for the purposes of, you know, other parts of the countryside generally, and housing generally, in small settlements and or anywhere where you could reasonably interpret it as being infill. So let's deal with part H on that basis, and then take as a separate issue the particular circumstances of where the staff and student accommodation may be appropriate in educational institutes, whether it's Bradfield or Pangbourne. I think we've got a representative for Pangbourne College tomorrow. So, and deal with that as a particular type of separate, a particular type of development. And then I think if that were dealt with in DM 38, and that was cross-referenced in here, it would take that particular form of residential development out of this definition of infill and everything else in here, and move it specifically into context of that particular other policy. The wider issue of whether there ought to be something in here or somewhere in the plan about allowing development on the edge of residential development on the edge of settlement, I think that I'd leave that as well as something that this isn't dealing with that matter. If that was a matter, it would be, I think it would be a strategic matter that would be subject to some sort of strategic policy, because I think it's more fundamentally different to trying to sort of fit it into here, personally. Is that okay? Does that kind of make sense for setting the discussion for tomorrow? So
Yes,
we'll come back to residential development in the particular circumstances of colleges in the countryside.
Yes, okay. I think I take your point. I just think there is scope there for a more general provision rather than necessarily one that's just only specifically relating to DM 38. The concern I have, if there is only an exception there for DM 38, is that will be needing to be controlled through the planning permissions, and most likely the officers would then seek to impose legal agreements limiting the occupation of those dwellings to the staff. And then that has other cost implications because that adds additional VAT to
Right.
build costs. So it's welcomed, but if there is a wider opportunity there for development beyond the settlement boundaries that doesn't, in addition to exceptions, if you see what I mean, that would be preferable.
Mm. But you're talking, when you're making that general point about an exception to having residential development on the edge of settlements, you're still talking, you're representing Bradfield College, you're not representing other wider interests. So it is still within the particular circumstances of the college. So again, I think what you're saying to me is that there may be, in terms of the long-term prospects of the college, being tied to only allowing residential development that is strictly limited to staff and student accommodation may be prohibitive for financial reasons. But in terms of purely planning operational reasons, we can talk about this. The purpose of DM38 is allowing an exception for those particular operational needs. So I think that we can come back to that tomorrow. Because it's, I mean, in effect, you're looking for some sort of exception for, I don't know, enabling type development or for economic viability long term or something of that nature. That would have to be part of the justification, would it not? Unless it's part of a more strategic approach, as I say, which everywhere it would apply that you could allow for this residential developments on the edge of settlements.
And I guess that comes down to the nature of the development that is being sought. I don't think the college aren't looking for development of necessarily greenfield sites on the edge of the settlement. It's very much, there are opportunities there where it's got existing residential development beyond the settlement boundary, which I flagged to you through the last submissions, where just simply through redevelopment of some of those plots, instead of having one house, you end up with 2 or 3. And so it's redevelopment of effectively, I know houses and gardens aren't necessarily classed as previously developed land, but you get my point. It's reusing existing footprint rather than extending further into the countryside.
But wouldn't they then be picked up by policies such as the replacement of existing dwellings?
But it would be more than just replacing the existing dwelling. If you're then adding, say, 2 or 3 houses in the garden, then that would be additional housing stock in the countryside, which wouldn't be allowed under that policy.
But if you applied that principle in the circumstances of Bradfield College, that principle would presumably apply elsewhere, in which case. Yes. So so you would say this is where we're picking up in part H here, a more generally permissive approach.
Yeah.
Okay. And potentially under part, I don't know, DM28, where we're talking about replacing existing dwellings.
Yes. So obviously the college could go and replace an existing dwelling, and that would accord with part F, which one?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, F, isn't it? Criteria A.
Subsequent DM28, whatever it is.
Caught me there. So yes, they could do that, but it doesn't increase their provision of housing stock. And it's just providing that flexibility. Say criteria H does not apply as currently drafted.
Okay, well, right, understood. So we'll come back, as I said, we'll come back to the particular circumstances of the college development for staff and student accommodation tomorrow. But let's have a discussion in a minute about part H and the extent to which this approach is justified and why it's justified in terms of, looking across the district as a whole and what it's trying to deal with. Okay, thank you. I think that was helpful. So I think that helps to define, for this and also what we'll talk about tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right. Just before we look at part H as well, can we just pick up the last paragraph so I don't forget? The grammar in this is rather odd. I think it would be helpful. Most of this plan is written about where development will be supported. This is planning permission will not be granted. Okay, it's pretty clear. And then I think we then get into I think it would be better as a series of either 1, 2, 3 or bullet points or something. So the first one is where a proposal harms or undermines the existing relationship of a settlement in the countryside. Okay. And then we get into a sort of double negative. Permission will not be granted where it does not contribute to something. And then I think you've got a sort of a subclause after that, including the special qualities of the natural beauty of the landscape near and be. And then I think the last bit is another one, a separate point again. And this is talking about cumulative impact on the environment and highway safety. So I think you've got three points there where permission will not be granted, one of which is a not. The last one brings in two separate things, but they're both about cumulative impact, which is always a tricky one. I'm not quite sure what that's got in mind. Dealing with the last one first, cumulative impact, what's that? How do you sort of assess a cumulative impact? I mean, surely if you get a proposal and it has an adverse impact on highway safety, that's... Oh,
Yeah, so it's the development, taking into account other developments in the area. We can have a look at that last paragraph and make it
yeah.
clearer more generally.
But the cumulative impact thing, is it because you're taking account of things that have happened or other things that have been permitted, and you're there thinking, well, it's already been permissioned for across the road or there, or both those things?
Both, really.
And is this something that has such a cumulative impact type policy been used in the past? Is that...
It has, yes.
It has, okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay, well, I'll leave that last paragraph with you then. So before then we leave the one, because I think A to G will pick up as we go through the subsequent, well, unless there's anything you want to say about any of those, because they're just cross-referring to things that we're going to talk about in a few in subsequent DM policies.
No, I didn't have any real concerns with those, thank you.
No, okay. And as I say, we'll come on to the detailed wording of some of them. So so part H is about limited residential infill. So it's in settlements in the countryside, but they don't have a settlement boundary. So if it's got a settlement boundary, the principle's established, it's a presumption in favour of development, so that's fine. So this is where there's not a settlement boundary, but it's still relating to settlements. So the first step in deciding this is where you've got a number of houses, whether it's a settlement or not. So that's deliberate. So if it were, well, we'll go on. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
So is there any kind of, I mean, presumably this has happened quite a lot. This type of development, you presume you get quite a lot in West Berkshire, yeah?
You do, yes, because of the nature of the settlement pattern.
Yeah.
So you'll get quite often small hamlets of around, say, 10 dwellings.
Oh, well, yeah, so there is some sort of benchmark, well, not necessarily benchmark, but the first judgment is whether it's a settlement or not. So if it's just a couple of houses, this infill policy wouldn't apply?
No, it wouldn't.
Right. But you mentioned a hamlet of sort of 10 or something. That's the point you're starting to get to, the feeling the world there's a group here of...
That's right,
yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Fine, okay. And then you bring on to this, and then so this is hence so when it's within a closely knit cluster of 10 or more, that's the definition of where you might be getting to a cluster, a settlement.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. So that's not a cluster within well, I suppose it could be a cluster within a wider spread, but basically you're looking for that sort of size of, okay, so that's the first thing. And then within that cluster, the scale consists of infilling a small undeveloped plot. And then that's looking at the relationship of that plot and that proposal to the two or more adjoining houses in that group. It doesn't extend the existing frontage at either end, so that wouldn't be infill because you're tagging onto the end. Okay, right. And then you get a sort of size and spacing. Okay, yeah, understood. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can express this sort of policy, but and are these words carried forward from your core strategy? And yeah,
they are, and the policy has actually been working very well.
So you get numerous applications a year of this sort of thing. Yeah, we
do. Yes.
Yeah. So when we talk about the 140 small site windfalls, quite a lot of them are these sort of things. This is the policy that applies in a lot of cases.
This is something that would contribute to that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, sorry, you broke down about how much would be in the urban areas and the other settlements, but outside the settlement boundaries, this is where you'd get. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. And in terms of leaving aside the particular circumstances of the college, but in general, this approach, do you want to have any points you wish to make?
Yes, I don't have an objection per se to the policy. I think my concern is here that it is, if if there is an allowance there for residential development beyond the settlement boundaries, and then this is effectively providing the only opportunity for new stock, if you like, without going through the criteria again, new housing stock in some of the least sustainable locations in the settlement hierarchy. You're looking at those very small hamlets as opposed to opportunities which are adjacent to settlements which are defined by a settlement boundary. There are, in the same way that I'm sure there are numerous examples of where there are these small little hamlets with 10 or more dwellings, there are also many examples where you have a settlement boundary and then you have development which spills beyond that settlement boundary. And I'm not just thinking of Bradfield here, where again, you have clusters of 10, 20 dwellings that are along the road frontage, but this policy wouldn't apply in those circumstances. Yet effectively, those would be, you would argue, more sustainable locations for that development to occur. And just, I mean, it's only a small point perhaps, but on criteria 2 there, where it says it consists of infilling a small undeveloped plot commensurate with the scale of character. Does that preclude developing an undeveloped gap between existing residential properties, which could be a garden? It's not necessarily a separate plot. Do you see what I mean? But I don't know. I'm not quite sure how they interpret the policy, but just a nuance there, really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that particular word plot, could that be part of a side garden of an existing house? It doesn't need, it's just an empty plot that's been left.
No, it doesn't. No,
No.
it could be a garden.
No, I think, okay. I think I understand this more strategic point about, and it is a strategic point, really. And I think it would actually, I raised it, I think last week when we were talking about housing land supply, didn't I? Because I think I said if to the council, if I were to conclude that the plan ought to identify more opportunities for housing beyond what it does, this was an if, I said, well, what would be the options? And I said, well, more allocations would be one. Increasing capacity on some allocation might be another. A third may be to sort of identify broad locations through something like a more permissive approach to edge of settlement type development. And I think it was, and I don't think anyone at that session suggested that there was anything else. So those were the options available. So I think that's your point again, isn't it? In terms of this strategy, if does it need to be a bit more flexible in terms of the relationship between developments on the edge of the larger settlements? I think is so.
And that's it. I suppose if you were to slightly revise this criteria, I'm not suggesting that necessarily how this would play out. You might say it needs to be an entirely separate policy provision.
Yeah.
But if this approach were to apply to existing settlements with defined settlement boundaries and the development beyond that, then obviously you wouldn't necessarily limit it to a single plot infill. There would be perhaps greater opportunities there for some redevelopment and some infill that is appropriate and sensitively designed in relation to the character of that particular settlement.
Yeah, understood. I mean, if the council were to go down such an approach, because I suggested they ought to or whatever, I think there's a whole load of issues about where you'd start. I mean, you first thing you start, well, which settlements are we talking about? Is it all of the ones with settlement boundaries, or is it some of the hierarchy? I mean, others, when we've had these discussions earlier at sessions, it wouldn't be limiting to infill. It would be people using all sorts of phrases about, just well related to and very. So I think, there's a whole set of things you'd have to start thinking about if you wanted to go down that route. But you've made the point very clearly, so I understand.
Yeah. No, I
Thank you.
fully appreciate that. And I've been there with other local authority plans and you might have different criteria for different sizes of settlement. So yes, that's a whole another day's session.
Absolutely. Well, it is. I mean, as I said, it's a strategic issue in essence.
I think
really.
it's just establishing whether there needs to be more allowance within DM1 than simply that criteria.
Okay. Well, I think my understanding of the council position is DM1 serves a very particular purpose. It's been used for a number of years, and it is about these small settlements, particular to the nature of West Berkshire, and that's its purpose. It doesn't have a strategic role in facilitating a housing development on the edge of the larger settlements. That's not its purpose at all. So, understood. So I think we'll leave that there. Unless, yes, sorry.
Very quickly, so just to clarify, in terms of DM 38,
Yeah.
if there is to be acknowledged that there should be an exception to that, would that be specifically stated within DM1 and set out as to how?
Well, let's think about how it would work in DM 38 first, because as I say, DM 38 is phrased in terms of any type of development. I think no, it's not just, but it's anything that's necessary for operational needs. And then in the reason justification, it refers to that. So we can talk about that tomorrow.
Okay.
And how it would be cross-referred to in DM1. I think it could be done in the same way as all these others, couldn't it? It could refer to.
Just at the moment, it's obviously referring to DM1, but.
Yeah, but it would be the other way around, I think.
Yeah.
DM 38, rather than refer back to DM1, would be DM 38 in its own right. And then this would just sort of, like it does with these others, it could say, staff and student accommodation that meets the requirements of DM 38.
Yeah.
Then it would take it out of the remit of this policy.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Which would deal with your
Oh, fine.
concerns in that respect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
just so that you and Bradfield College are aware, the council has read and understood what the concerns of Bradfield College are, and we have had a discussion about what we think could be done with the supporting text of DM 38 or DM 38 itself. We could discuss it still, we can discuss it tomorrow, because I think there may be other parties coming tomorrow, I don't know. But it is on our minds and we have had to think about it.
Okay. Well, and I think Pangbourne College are coming tomorrow, Turley. So certainly I want to have the discussion tomorrow. If you've got anything written before tomorrow, I don't suppose it would be any harm in circulating it. I mean, if we finish at lunchtime today, it'd give you something to while away the afternoon, wouldn't it? So, so I'll leave it with you. I've got no, we're going to talk about it, so it wouldn't do any harm to have something tabled in advance. If you do have a chance, that's fine. Okay, thank you. So that deals with DM1. Let's just move on to DM 23 to 27. I don't really have a lot of, these are very detailed development management policies. Again, I suspect these are things that the council have used for a number of years. In essence, is the wording being carried forward subject to any tweaks that
Essentially, yes. Yes. just
I mean,
tweaks.
and if improvements were needed, the tweaks were made. That was yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't think I had very much. Let me just see though. DM 23. I mean, there used to be a circular on this, didn't there? And a PPG, I think. I can't remember. But anyway, there's NPPF. But the principle of it is established, and this is detailed stuff. It's all about linking the proving a need and meeting certain environmental criteria, etc. So I didn't have any, I don't think I've got any detailed questions about that. DM 24, this is about existing buildings that are redundant. Again, don't think I've got anything I needed to ask about. And there's a general point that I think Savills made in their reps that these policies deal with certain detailed issues about highways, environment, heritage that are dealt with elsewhere. But I mean, that's this way this plan is structured. So I don't think there's any, and there's not cross-reference. So when it says there's no adverse impact on rural character, well, you have to look at other policies to apply that. And that's not uncommon to this plan. So I think that's understood. DM 25, replacement of existing dwellings. I mean, this might be one where Ms. White wants to have a word. I mean, this talks about being on the footprint. And then in the reason justification, well, no, it talks about being on the footprint, first of all. And then in part C, it talks about the replacement building is proportionate in size and scale. Always a bit puzzled by what proportionate means. Could it be twice as big and still be proportionate? I think it could. But then in the reason justification, if it's disproportionate, it won't be accepted. The key components of proportionality are scale, massing, volume, height, width, length, footprint. So what's this? What is actually this getting at? Is it trying to say it shouldn't be any bigger?
I don't think it's saying it can't be any bigger. I think it's saying you can't knock down a small house and build one 10 times the size. And I think the use of the word proportionate and then the clarifying text, I think does lead to some flexibility so that planning judgment can be applied to assess what's proportionate in terms of the replacement dwelling.
Okay, so if
I think officers probably do see quite a lot
yeah,
applications for
trying to,
much larger
yeah.
dwellings going on.
Okay. And the reason the council doesn't want much larger dwellings or wants to at least have this is an issue is what? Is it for basically the character and appearance
Yeah,
reasons?
character and appearance primarily, not a social policy as such.
No, okay. So no objection. Well, no, yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, is it? I don't know. I mean, it isn't for that. It isn't to do with affordability of rural dwellings. Trying to
I think
keep
that's
it-
probably a side effect, but it's primarily for the character and appearance. When you get small bungalows, you don't want it to be very large sort of mansions, and that impacts on the character and appearance of the area. But yeah, I think that's.
if you've got a small, not particularly attractive house or bungalow that doesn't contribute positively to the character and appearance of the area, and someone comes in with a fantastic, nice big house, what's wrong with that?
Well, yeah, everything depends on the actual plot size, relationship to surrounding area. It could work on certain circumstances, and I think there are examples where it has happened. But yeah,
When it says located on the footprint, does that mean it's got to fit within the footprint? It doesn't. Is that where proportionality comes in?
it's more that it's on the same kind of area of the plot, really.
But again, why is that necessary? If there were a better area of the plot that would fit in better with the surroundings?
But there are circumstances where it can be. Yeah,
And I think criteria B does deal with that because it does say unless alternative siting has a positive
Okay, sorry, it
benefit.
does, yeah.
So your point, it
Yeah.
could be moved so that it actually is in a better location.
Yeah, okay. But the reality of all this is that this is basically works. It's basically trying to keep some sort of control on what could otherwise lead to, the replacement of, buildings that fit within the character now that are replaced with much larger houses. Okay. Good. Okay. Thank you. Understood. Similar with extensions, I think, isn't it? It's a similar sort of principle. Here, rather than proportionate, we've got the phrase subservient. This is premised on the fact that I suppose that the building that exists has a particular character and that you're going to retain that by ensuring that the extension to it is subservient to it. I'm talking about residential extensions, DM28. Yeah, I've jumped ahead rather than the extensions to the curtilage, sorry. DM28, Part A, the scale of the enlargement or outbuilding is clearly subservient to the original dwelling. So this is a similar issue, really. It's character and appearance. It's sort of, yeah. I guess there can be exceptions to this where you could improve an existing building by quite a large extension that changed actually the character and appearance of the existing building in some circumstances through the extension, and it resulted in a more attractive building.
Absolutely, case by case basis.
Yeah.
In settlement, out of settlement. Yes, yeah.
Okay. In terms of, sorry, jumping back, I didn't have anything about the DM26, the residential curtilage. Again, I imagine it's an issue that crops up every now and again, and it seems to be particularly with parking provision. That's the most common one, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Subdivision. It was an issue raised by Savills again, I think. Part C talks about it would not lead to significant extensions, including alterations and outbuildings. When it says lead to, does that mean involve or require? It's part of the proposal rather than it's something you're trying to look ahead that it may result in something in the future.
It is, yeah, we would actually propose to change, not lead to require.
Yeah, or involve or require. Yeah, okay. Fine, I'll leave that with you. Right, okay. That means I think I've finished under 9.6 unless there's anything else anybody wish to say about those. No, okay. So the next couple are about affordable housing, aren't they? In essence, first homes, exception sites and rural exception sites, both of which are national policy, which is essentially reflected. Yeah, I suppose the only issue about first homes, you are limiting it to settlements with a settlement boundary. That's for accessibility reasons, essentially, is it?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah, so it's sort of, there's a cutoff beyond which you wouldn't think it would be sensible to deliver first
there's
homes.
small sites to help providing affordable housing in rural areas.
Yeah. And so, okay, and rural exception sites, DM17, again, that's reflecting national policy to.
That's just long established now. First homes is a sort of a new homes exception policy is a newer policy, but rural exception sites is all the established principle.
McCarthy and Stone raised the issue about DM19. I mean, we touched on this the other day, actually, on affordable housing, didn't we? DM19 deals with all sorts of specialised housing. The reason justification 1116 deals with sheltered housing again. So remind me why are you excluding sheltered housing from this policy? I think we dealt with it in terms of affordable housing provision, but in terms of this policy, why is sheltered housing not a specialist form of housing?
Because the same principle applies to this one, because I'm separating care housing and sheltered housing. The idea is to try to exempt sheltered housing from providing affordable housing.
Yes, but the NPPF definition of specialist housing for the elderly includes sheltered housing, doesn't it?
The PPG definition has got 4 or 5 categories. The first 2 categories are sort of retirement housing. It's their purpose-built flats or bungalows with limited community facilities. It does not generally provide care services, but provides some support. So the first 2 categories of known as age-restricted general market housing and retirement living don't involve the provision of care. So they should not be exempted from affordable housing provision.
Yeah, understood that, but does DM19 in general, when it talks about specialists or specialised, I'm not quite sure which was the right word.
It could be specialist.
It should be specialist.
It could be.
No, I'm not sure. But would sheltered housing fall within the remit of DM9, leaving aside the affordable housing provision, which I think I understand the
Yeah.
point you're making?
Yeah.
But DM19 in itself, does it apply to sheltered housing?
Yeah, to all the people's housing, yes.
Because PPG does include sheltered housing within
It,
its definition of specialist housing for older people, doesn't it?
correct, yeah, but yes, but that is correct. That it does deal with the two, but the only point I'm making is to do on the issue of affordable housing.
Yes, okay, understood. Right, let me leave
So
it with
I
me.
think paragraph 11.17 should remain as it is, not as proposed for deletion by McCarthy and Stone.
But 11,
Sarah,
17
can I understand your point? Your point is that even if the specialised housing definition was the same as PPG, then because of how the affordable housing policy is written, that element of specialised housing would be excluded anyway. It
So,
wouldn't, yes.
Yeah,
Can we have a look
Yeah,
at those two
yeah.
policies together and get back?
yeah, I
to
think
you?
so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Because 1117 doesn't talk about affordable housing in 1117. It's almost saying sheltered housing, we're not counting it as specialist housing. Or we're not, this is a permissive policy for specialist housing.
I'll have a think about it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. Okay, thank you. Right. Issue 9.4 is about mobile home parks, DM21. A short policy. So these are defined, this policy refers to as shown on the policies map. So all of these, so this policy does only apply to sites that are identified on the policies map, is that right? Yeah, that's intentional because it's a bit of hesitancy. So there are a number of these sort of largest parks. This is not to deal with general mobile homes that are, small groups of them or as individual ones. This is where there's a defined mobile home park.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a number of those in the
Yes.
district, and they're shown on the policies map.
Yes.
And this seeks to retain those unless the redevelopment or the loss would provide 100% affordable housing. So that could be clear all the mobile homes off and build affordable houses, bricks,
That is the objective, yes.
Yeah. Does that happen? Has that happened?
I think not that I know.
Oh, okay. But the principle would be these serve a purpose by providing low cost homes. So the rationale was if you're going to lose that, affordable housing. Yeah, okay, understood.
Correct, yes.
Which will meet the locally identified needs. So that would take account of the people that already live there, presumably, their needs. Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Right, okay. Understood. 9.5, residential use above non-residential units. DM22. Yeah, the only question I had about this when I read it again, why does it refer to meeting the conditions and limitations of the GPDO? I mean, that, presumably that, well, it goes without saying, does it not? The DM22, the very last part of it, requires development to meet the conditions and limitations of the GPDO, including the need to apply for prior approval. Well, I mean, that's, I suppose it's correct, but it's not. Yeah, okay. It probably doesn't matter, but no, there's no particular reason it's in. It's just that it's true. It's true. If it's true, it's sound, I suppose. I don't, residential extensions and annexes, this is again, I guess this is a policy that is applied quite a lot through proposals that come forward. I don't have any questions about those. Right, is there anything else that anybody wishes to say on that group of policies? There's a few detailed points there. So what we'll do now, I don't know whether, yeah. Yeah, okay. What we're going to do now, it's 25 past 10. Yeah, we'll adjourn until 11:15.
He's on a, I'm just going to let Ms Willits give you an update on
Yeah.
where Mr Bullock is.
I believe he's on a train to Newbury, but I don't know if that's from London or Reading, so I'm just going to clarify.
Okay.
It might be a bit longer.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, should we break now and resume at 11? And assume that unless he's got badly delayed, he'll be available then. Okay, so I'll come
Thank
back at
you.
11. If there's any problem, then we'll have a further adjournment. Sorry if you're having to wait so long, but it's earlier than 2 o'clock this afternoon anyway, if we're looking at it like that. Okay, thank you. There's a nice cafe and the sun is shining. Okay, excuse me, it's 11 o'clock, so we will resume. I think Mr. Bullock has obviously arrived. Welcome. Yeah, good, thank you. Good timing. Right, so we're dealing now with matter 10, which is about the need for and the provision of accommodation for gypsies and travellers and travelling show people. We've got 4 separate issues. One's to do with needs and provision for the 2 different categories of traveller. So we'll deal first with matter issue 10.1, which is what the evidence suggests is the identified need for additional accommodation for gypsies and travellers. The definition of gypsy and traveller has changed over the years. The PPTS, the Planning Policy for Traveller Sites National Policy document, was updated, I think it was December last year, wasn't it? And that reflected a court case which led the government to revert back to an earlier version of the definition of gypsies and travellers for the purposes of planning policy. So in essence, it includes travellers that have ceased either temporarily or permanently to travel to be caught within the definition of gypsy and traveller for the purposes of planning policy. So in terms of identifying needs and making provision for, includes all those groups of people. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion in the intervening years when the definition was changed about how the needs of those people should be met if it wasn't on sites with, family members and other travellers that do meet the definition. But leaving that aside, we're now back to the position where all travellers are included. The reason I'm talking about that is because the context for the work that ORS did, ARC, not ORS, sorry. Where I got that from? Anyway, the work that you did for the council was based on at a time when the definition had changed and you might sort a distinction between the different categories of traveller. But that said, the way that your research meets the needs, I mean, is it fair to say that if you wanted just to deal with the new definition or the current definition, you could just put the 2 columns together and that would encompass the definition? Is that correct, or is it not simple as that?
Just to be clear, so yeah, we always took the view that the 2015 definition was flawed in its concept because we find a lot of variation. So we always maintained to look at the overall need, which was termed the cultural need, and then of which it was the households that then met that the PPTS definition, the nomadic habit of life. So what you have in front of you is the overall need of the figures in the GTAA of an overall need of let's start with we're talking residual need of 20 over the plan period, of which 10 met the definition as per the old 2015. So we're looking at that need of 20.
Yeah. I'll stop you there because you're already getting into residual need, and I got confused before you even mentioned that. But anyway, so the total need identified in your work was 30. Yeah. And that related to a period of 2021 to 2038. Yeah. So that's 30 for that period. Okay. So that's as set out in the plan, table 7. Total cultural need 30. Okay, that's clear enough. Right. So for the first question, I suppose, is that assessment of need, the full assessment was carried out in 2019. Was that by you? Yeah. And then it was updated in 2021. Yeah. So was there much difference between those two? The original assessment and the update? No, I suppose what I'm trying to get at, we're now in 2024. How is the figure of 30 likely to be, leaving aside the residual and what's been provided? Are you reasonably satisfied? It's reasonably up to that. I mean,
it's reasonable at the moment. I think one of the things to bear in mind is Four Houses Corner and the redevelopment of that. Which on the one hand going to help meet some of that need, but also once new households are bedded in there, then we're going to be reviewing, or hopefully reviewing, the GTA evidence at that point. So what I think is important to do is stress that the 30 is seen as a minimum need over the plan period. I think that's reasonable language, recognising that there are some subtleties within West Berkshire which we'll need to review on an ongoing basis.
So that's on the basis that the need is essentially arising from existing households that are in West Berkshire.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's about looking at the households that are there, their age profile and their future needs, those sort of things.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a matter of trying to factor in people who may move to the district. It's about understanding the households that exist. Yeah,
It's understanding the current dynamics, and what we do is when we, as you'd be familiar when you're doing a GTAA, you're looking at all those different dynamics. So you're looking at household mobility, you're looking at household formation, existing households wanting to move, flows to and from bricks and mortar. Those kind of things are all factored in. And one of the issues is that when you're dealing with a GTAA in an area such as West Berkshire, it's very, at the end of the day, it's very small numbers of people. And I know already that once the Four Houses Corner site is reoccupied, we'll need to carefully review the very longer term need, particularly for many children that are going to be on that site. And that's where any future update of the evidence base will come, which is, again, it's just a circumstance, quite specific to West Berkshire, that there will be some change in supply in the short term, which may lead to some longer term increase in need, but we don't know that at this moment in time, hence the minimum figure that we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. That's a helpful update. So in terms of and we've sorry.
Yeah, just to confirm that when we're doing the assessment, we look at those people that have moved onto a pitch in the previous 5 years and where they've come from. So we do factor in a degree of migration into the analysis as well.
Understood. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So in terms of the update that's been proposed as a modification to table 7, which is in exam 23. I think this is where you're getting onto what you described as residual need, Mr. Bullock, of 20. So let me just try and understand what this is. This is taking situation in 2021 to 2038, either 30, and then looking what's happened between 2021 and 2023 in terms of provisional of additional pitches. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, because we do know there's new pitches coming forward. So we're factoring that into how we could start to meet that 30.
It's not changing the baseline of 30
No.
from 2021, but it's simply, in effect, updating the table.
That's correct.
Right. So another way of presenting this would be to sort of say, or present it from 2023, which I suppose what it does, but the bottom line is the 20, really, from 2023
Indeed,
onwards.
yes.
Okay. Okay. In terms of the column, which is of which PPTS need, I mean, is it, for simplicity's sake, would it be easy to do away with that at the moment?
We just don't need it now.
No, it doesn't. It's not needed anymore, is it? I mean, I noticed in the PPTS, the government does say it's going to review the definition in 2024. So, but if it changes again, yeah, exactly. If it changes again, it changes again. That's fine. So what we're dealing with is an identified need for 30, 10 has been provided. In terms of that provision so I suppose the question is, in terms of the outstanding need at 2023, what the provision is at that date. We can look at, but the provision in the plan is for one site. It's basically altering a transit site to permanent pitches.
At Pacey's Hill, that's correct.
Yeah, at Pacey's Hill. So where's this additional 10 that's been provided between 2021 and 2023 being made? It doesn't affect that, or does it?
So that's so when we're talking about starting with 30 going down to 20, the 10 comprises the Pacey's Hill, and then also additional pitches at Four Houses Corner and an additional pitch at Ermine Street, as set out in that table 7.
So the supply of new provision identified in this plan, the transit pitches, the 8.
Yep.
That's gone now.
That's I understand that's.
Well, that's what's led to the 10 that's come off the 30. So what was left with is a need for 20 from 2023 onward.
Correct.
And no provision. No identified supply unless something else has happened.
No, in terms of transit, no extra.
No, not transit. The opportunities for new permanent pitches.
No, no, we have tried to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked before, I think, about you know, looking for a call for sites and
Yeah.
nothing really coming forward.
Yeah.
And there haven't been any permissions granted or anything else that's come forward since
There's
then.
been no more permissions at the moment. There are still 3 live planning applications in the system. And actually 1 planning application for 2 pitches is likely to go to next Wednesday's planning committee
Okay.
with a recommendation for approval.
Okay.
And
But if we're dealing with the need and supply as of 2023, we're in a situation where the identified residual need is 20 and there's no identified supply.
that's right, yeah.
Okay. In terms of the need for transit pitches, there was a provision made, but that's now gone. Yeah. I.e. there was the Paces Hill was available for transit, or
It wasn't. I
Right.
think one of the things that is really important is nuance and understanding the circumstances for particular sites. And a lot of this material we don't publish because it's personal information that we're given by site managers, site owners, etc. I think the situation, I think what could be said is that the situation for Paces Hill was it was transient in name, but in practice it was more of a family site. It was being used for extended family members. And so therefore, you know, having spoken to the owner and spoken to his views on how he uses a transit site, my considered view was it was going to be better used as more permanent residential accommodation rather than as transit provision, because it wasn't exactly open to anybody to use, I think it's fair to say.
no? Understood.
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
one of those subtle nuances that you don't really make a public statement about.
Yeah,
But
okay,
I think the point was what I wanted to do in the GTA is reconcile the views of the site owner with where his needs were lying as a from a broader family group, and how he was actually using that land.
So it'd be wrong to interpret the fact that you've lost 8 pitches that were described as being about transient pitches. That it doesn't mean that there's now a need for 8.
No, that's correct.
There isn't an identified need for transient.
No, I mean, transit has shifted so much in terms of how it's provided, and our general recommendation now to local authorities is to adopt negotiated stopping as a way of providing land that people can stop on for short periods of time, rather than dedicated transit sites. There's less than 500 actual transit pitches across the country. Most of them don't get used for that purpose anyway. So nationally, things have shifted to this negotiated stopping concept. There's less of an urgency to have what you might traditionally call a transit site.
So unless you had a very clear, regular pattern of a demand for transit pitches for a particular reason, which isn't the case here, it would be very difficult to know, you know, what sort of transit provision.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, just by way of example, I'm working on another local authority area at the moment where there was a very specific need for a specific purpose about hospital visiting, which means that actually it makes a lot of sense to have something that's got more of a permanence about it in terms of a location people can go to. But that's the general tenor as to how things are progressing now within meeting transit need.
Okay, understood. Right. So that's the latest sort of update to the situation. We'll deal with what provision, what the plan does at the moment in terms of making provision. But in terms of look at that, let's turn to Aldermaston Parish Council, because you raised some concerns about well, you outline what your view is in terms of the work that was done in terms of assessing the extent of the need.
Well, I think one of the concerns I had was in terms of the evidence base, the PTS says a particular attention should be paid to early and effective community engagement with both settled and traveller communities, and that then provides robust evidence base. We've spoken, and there was never that communication with us, and I think that was because it was felt that would be too difficult. And I think that's very disappointing, and I think that does undermine the robustness of that evidence base. And I question why that hasn't happened.
But in terms of what you've read and heard explained in terms of the assessment of need and how it's sort of worked out based on, you know, the households that currently live there, I mean, well, I suppose looking at the other way, if you had been able to engage more with Mr. Bullock, what do you think might have come out differently in terms of your view of what the needs are?
Well, I think it's interesting that he's admitting now that, and I can understand the sensitivities, that things can't go into the report. But the problem by not putting them into the report is that West Berkshire Council then goes forward with the idea that they are approving 8 for 8 on that site. And the problem with that is that it's counter to SP4, which is increasing population density in the DEPZ. The fact that those 8 transit pitches never existed means that the population base will increase if it's now used going forward for 8 permanent pitches. So therefore, it's definitely counter to SP4, and it has an implication for everybody that lives in the DEPZ from a safety perspective, because we know that people living in caravans are vulnerable in the event of a radiation emergency. It doesn't afford them the shelter they need. So there's an increased pressure on the emergency plan. So I think that's what this has led to, is a misunderstanding of what's on the ground there. And if they communicated with us, I think we could have communicated that and said, well, here's going to be the problem down the line with the planners. And the second thing I would have pointed out is that it's a very small site. So when it was approved in 2003 as an 8 pitch transit site, and that had a specific condition which said it was 1 caravan per pitch. The reason being anymore would be overdevelopment of the site. This new approval in 2022, which establishes the 8 permanent pitches, allows for 2 caravans per pitch. It means it's a very crowded site, which I think is poor quality accommodation for families, which is what you'd be targeting, I think, with these are family pitches with 2 caravans. And I think that's bad news for people living on site, because there are no play areas, there's no facilities, it's very crowded. So I think, you know, and the report, the GTTA, they recommends an average pitch size of 625 square meters per pitch. If you measure the land there that you're suggesting would be used for 8 permanent pitches, actually equates to less than 200 square meters per pitch. So that is something that a conversation I would have liked to have had, because, you know, you could justify some more permanent accommodation there because there have been some people there. In fact, the site's had 1 large static caravan on it over the years, and you can use aerial photos to see, you know, come and go, maybe 1 or 2 trailing caravans, mobile caravans as well, but no way the same quantity that you would get in these now approved 8 permanent pitches. So, you know, I think that's what we'd like to have seen: better quality accommodation, fewer accommodations, better quality, and some amenities. You've got to consider having brick-built amenity or day rooms so that they can afford appropriate shelter. All those things, that's a conversation we could have had, but obviously it didn't happen.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Anything else on the sort of needs assessment side before we look at what we're left with in terms of provision going forward, that anybody wishes to say? No? Okay. And in terms of the concerns raised there by the parish council in terms of the permission, I mean, that permission has been granted. In terms of the things like the size of the pitches and the quality of the site, I mean, are those things that presumably were factored into the council's decision-making process?
Yeah, the decision-making process. I would point out that the condition, when we're talking about eight pitches and 2 caravans on site, part of the recent permission, only 1 caravan will be a static caravan, and I suppose that's different with a permanent site to a transit site. Transit will be 1 caravan, so it's not increasing the population. It's accounting for being a permanent use and needing that day facility.
Yeah.
Second caravan usually a tour.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And
I think just a general point. So I mean, I fully take the points that you've made there. And one of the real challenges we have generally is understanding the relationship between caravans, pitches, households, and it gets very complicated very quickly. I think what I would say in this particular context is I spoke at length to the site owner to understand where he was coming from, and what he was looking for. And I know that Cheryl and her team have done the similar thing as well. So this is about making a response that's appropriate for that family unit. And sometimes, I mean, I've been on sites where you've had, you know, a very significant number of caravans in a small space. That's certainly Paces Hill is not at that level. But I think the point is it's a family unit that we're talking about here and meeting the needs of that particular family unit. But I fully appreciate that a lot of work is done on site design and appropriateness of sites. And sometimes you have to be pragmatic about what can be done in particular localities.
Okay, any final comments? I mean, the fact of the matter is, what, you know, I've got a job to do, and the fact of the matter is the permission has been granted, and I think we're looking forward. But I mean, any further?
Well, also to identify that report goes on to say, not only do you identify the 8 sites, as you 8 pitches, he said you should have more conversations, suggested to West Berkshire Council have more conversations about whether more pitches could go on that site on Paces Hill in the future. I think at some point you've got to recognise that it is in the DPZ, it is in the urgent protective action zone, there is no protection for those, the ones that have already been approved, the individuals there. And a problem we have, and I know it's outside of the scope of what you're doing here today, is that there's no enforcement. So those 8 pitches will never be built. The plans that were put forward were, compared to the 4 houses corner, very substandard. They don't even do the 3 meters from the boundary. There's all kinds of stipulations you're meant to have with this kind of accommodation. And that isn't even demanded of that site by West Berkshire Council. And as I said, it will not be built out as per plans anyway. And it's kind of quite important to recognise that it's dangerous to put more people in that location.
In terms of I mean, presumably now that you've said there's a shortfall still, there's a need for 20 additional pitches. In terms of the relationship between looking ahead and the DEPZ, what's, you know, I mean, we've talked about the strategy for the DEPZ, and that's like not making any new residential allocations within it. That this allocation was made because of the sort of history, and I think there's one other housing allocation that again was had a history that was sort of commitment. But looking ahead, when you go for a call for sites for additional gypsy and traveller accommodation, what's the sort of the strategy in terms of DEPZ?
Yeah, I think, the call for sites is generally quite open, and everything's on a site-by-site basis. So with Paces Hill, I recognise what Aldermaston was saying, but it is on a like-for-like basis. It's a neutral impact, so we need to look at the whether there's anything on site at the moment. But thinking again for Paces Hill, we did talk to the site owner about possibly increasing the number there, but obviously it's in the proximity to AWE, and that met with objection from our emergency planning officers. So we would not be seeking to increase the capacity at Paces Hill. We would, if any sites came forward within the DPZ as a call for sites, it possibly wouldn't be allocated on that basis.
So in terms of what this plan says and what I've got before me is the provision for 8 here, and that's now committed. There's a talk about DM20, which we'll look at in a minute, in terms of that's how you deal with planning applications that come forward. And then you've also talked about doing an update to the plan to look through a call for sites for additional provision. But that would all be within the context of policy SP4 and the emergency planning, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, generally would not allocate in the DPZ. That's with Paces Hill, the particular.
And and there aren't any words in this plan about making additional provision at this site or any other site within the DEPZ.
No,
other than what is now being.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, well that sets the context. As best I can see it in terms of what this plan says.
This site was specifically refused by West Berkshire Council for all the reasons we've outlined in 2010. So it's bizarre. They are so desperate, and I understand it, with a statutory obligation to meet this need that's been identified, that they will do it again and again. So I wish I could be confident, but let's hope. It would be nice to have it set in stone, but you'd think it would be through SB4, but it obviously hasn't been, so. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Right. So I don't think there's anything else we can talk about well, I mean, the policies RSA 24 and Paces Hill allocation, but I mean, we've talked about that. In terms of looking ahead then, we've got, well, two things that the plan says, which is DM20, and I can't remember what's actually in the text here. Yeah, there's to address, the context is to address the longer term need for gypsy and traveller pitches. Well, this is 1135, and I think you might want to review the wording of this. When you're talking about longer term, I mean, basically what you're talking about is there's an identified need from 2023 onwards for 20 additional pitches. There's also the need to review the evidence anyway, so that may change. So those two things would presumably be brought together to then identify what the updated need would be looking ahead from 2023, whether it's still 20 or more. And then in parallel with that, how you best meet that need. And that would be through what it says here. A local development scheme outlines a timetable, evidence being prepared February 23 and December 25, leading to adoption 2027. Well, that's the sort of broad timetable set out. Yeah.
That's correct.
And in the meantime, we have policy in DM20, which is basically a policy that sets out criteria for any proposal to come forward to you within the context of development in the countryside or elsewhere. So I think, I mean, I tried to read this in the context of the PPTS, because the PPTS includes development management sort of type policies and principles mainly in paragraphs 13, 25 and 26. And I think it appears to me that the intention is that you've reflected those in this criteria-based policy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So you brought those principles and those policies in the PPTS together into this.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the sort of the parts A, B, C, and D. So that talks about allocations in this plan. Then you've talked about expansions to existing authorised gypsy and travellers sites. So I suppose that comes back to the question I was just asking about the relationship between that and the DEPZ.
Yeah, I think it's more general because there are some smaller sites that are outside of the DEPZ, which would be caught under. But you would still need to review this policy in context with any other policies in the plan, such as SP4.
Yeah, okay. So where the existing sites are in the district, there are a number in the DEPZ and a number that are not.
Yeah, it's limited generally in West Berkshire.
Yeah.
But there, yeah.
How many are there altogether? Authorised sites?
Sorry,
How many authorised sites altogether?
We've got, just bear with me a second.
Okay, it doesn't matter. I'll leave that with Mr. Bullock.
There's Ermine Street, there's Mayfair, yeah, there's smaller, yeah, also Paces Hill and Four Houses Corner are our main sites, large sites. Well, yes, and we have a number of smaller units.
But if those smaller sites had a need for additional pitch, that's what this policy would be saying. If that was a particular family that needed another caravan,
Yeah.
So that would be a principle that you'd sort of look to.
Yeah, as long as it complies with the remaining parts of the criteria of this policy and any other relevant local plan.
Yeah,
policies.
okay. Right. And then after you've looked at opportunities where extending an existing sites located in or well related to existing settlements. So that's back to the settlement boundaries and if possible within the settlement or well related in terms of making, yeah. And then in rural settings. So in essentially, does that mean C and D, it's not expressed in the same way as we've been talking about other policies about settlement boundaries, but it's in essence C, we're talking about settlements with boundaries. And then D is everywhere else.
That's right, yeah, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So anywhere that's, but it's still subject to that criteria, those criteria.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, anything you want to say about this sort of general approach in DM20?
Just concern really back to where the settlements are, the pictures are at the moment, is that if we assume that each family perhaps is needing over, I don't know what period, one extra unit. Obviously, the problem here is that there are a number of smaller, maybe one family units, which over the next 5 years may want to put one more pitch there. Obviously, the problem is the two big ones. If you've got 17 families in 4 houses and over 30 households in Paces Hill, they need to double in size, and they're both in the DEPZ. So at the moment, the frustration is seeing no provision for where the biggest growth is going to come from, because it's simply not possible to put them in that area. So you are needing essentially to identify a new multi-pitch site, perhaps like the 4 houses one, and West Berks would tell you it's because no sites come forward. But at what point should the council be being more proactive, and they lease the land from Englefield in the case of 4 houses, and they need to look to lease land to control and be in control of the process. And it would be nice to see the council being proactive to provide good quality accommodation in appropriate places.
Yeah. So, and the benefit of that, of course, in terms of the DEPZ and this site, it would take the pressure off here because you could find an appropriate. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Understood. Thank you. Anything you want to say?
Just in response quickly that the council generally don't own any land, and we do lease the land from Anglefield, as I said, for 4 Houses Corner. We don't have the opportunities, unfortunately, to provide our own sites, and that's why we rely on the private sector, unfortunately.
Thank you. That was helpful. Understood the issue. I know it's a difficult issue, and well, I'll think about it and think about what this plan says in terms of where we are now and what the identified need is and what it can say about going forward. But I mean, there seems to be a clear commitment from the council to go through that process again of updating the need assessment and thinking about where it could best be met. Okay. Anything else on the Gypsy and Travellers before we move on to the travelling show people? No, okay. So this is, 1 minute. So the situation, as I understand it here, is that there's an existing site at Long Copse Farm, which is south of Village Venbourne. That's correct? I've got 2 maps before me, and they've confused me somewhat. So just to make sure I understand this. On the policies map, we've got an area that's hatched purple, I think. You've got the. I've just looked at the online policies map.
Bear with me, I'll just pull it up.
Sorry, it might take a minute. And it's got an area that's shaded red. In the key, these are described, well, the area shaded red, if I'm reading it right, it says Gypsy and travel allocations proposed. But I assume in this case that's intending to encompass travelling show people.
Yes, and I think actually our policies map is, I've just been told it's wrong and needs updating, so it just, it does need to reflect what's in RSA 24.
Oh, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's got a red area and a purple hatched area that seem to overlap, although it's a bit hard. It seems to have a blue line, which I'm not sure what that is. And then it's got. But anyway, either way, there's a map in the plan. Which comes immediately after the policy over the page from RSA 25. Which has what's just says site boundary, and then it's got a hatched area, which is described as ancient woodland, which on the policies map is shown as a gypsy and traveller site. So I'm all rather very confused.
No, that's fine. I think so take the map from RSA 25 in the local plan review, and
Right.
we would need to update the policies map, the interactive version. Yes.
When you say update, you mean,
To be compliant, yeah, corrected.
well, I mean, no, or does it reflect something that's in the past?
Well, it's the, oh, yeah, it's the allocation from the housing site allocation.
Okay,
document.
well, the red area was.
I think
an
the
original
whole site
allocation.
was not necessarily allocated for the whole use, but for identified as a travelling show person
Right.
site for, and with sort of the buffers as well for the ancient woodland and landscaping.
So
Yeah,
I can
sorry.
ignore the policies map. Right, so I'm looking at this plan here, which has a red line. And that this site is currently used as a site for as a base, a HQ for the travelling Zippo circus, yeah? Is that correct? Yeah.
That's great, yeah.
And the proposal is, so that's a yard for the equipment that they bring back when they're not travelling, is that correct? And it's the base, it's the base.
It's the base fit, yeah.
Yeah. And do people live there at the moment over the winter or whenever?
I believe there's permission for 4 plots at the moment, and there have been, they might not all be in use at the same time, but yeah.
Sorry?
They might not all be in use at the same time, but they
No.
have been used. There was an application in 2018 to temporarily store about 22 caravans, and that was
Okay.
used.
And so this red line is all within the ownership or it's all in the use of the circus.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the moment they've got permission to have 4 caravans on it. And the
That's
rest of it's
historic,
sort of
yeah.
storage and maintenance and whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what this plan is proposing then is to allow 24 plots to be provided within that red line.
Within the red line, and that's 24, including the 4 already accounted for.
And then there's still space within there for what they've been doing historically in terms of storing and maintaining equipment, etc.
I believe so.
So there's no change to the site boundary. It's just a
No.
different use being brought.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
so that's what the position is. In terms of the need for this, for how long has this, roughly, how long has this operation been going? We talking years, decades, or?
I think the permission for the headquarters was granted on appeal 2001.
Okay. And on that basis, it was for the headquarters with, and then or either then or subsequently 4 residential plots were allowed. Yeah.
Yes.
And so the thing that's changing now is adding on this 20 more. And that's because this identified needs for people that currently live elsewhere, is that right? Yeah. So this is
Yeah,
People-
I mean, again, just by way of background, we rocked up to the site thinking, oh, there'll be loads of, and there's nobody there. So we thought, oh, we just printed all these questionnaires out, there's nobody here.
Yeah.
But we spoke to the owner, and again, not anecdotally, what the owner was telling us at the time when we did the study was that the site is currently used for wintering quarters for the circus, and we saw evidence of
Yeah.
that. He was keen to develop the site, but it's financial. He wasn't in the position to do it at that moment in time. But the application was there. The need is certainly there for providing appropriate accommodation. I think just more broadly, we do a lot of work with the travelling show person community across England. And one of the massive issues is the lack of appropriate accommodation for showmen. There's been some really useful developments recently in Oxfordshire, which have been hugely helpful to communities. But generally speaking, there is such a scarcity of provision. And this is one of those, in my view, one of those real opportunities where land has been allocated for showman use. and that is now being brought forward, through to fruition, to delivery of those particular plots to help provide accommodation.
Your understanding is that the need comes from family members who live elsewhere.
Correct.
On unauthorised sites.
Yeah, or may not be able to, because one of the challenges is there's a balance to be struck between the residential and the equipment storage and the wintering quarters. There's again, it's quite a complex area, but again, talking directly to the owner of the site, he was very keen that he wanted it to be developed at some point, but it was just the financial constraints at the time, which hopefully, well, it seems to have been resolved anyway.
In terms of this red line, and what you're saying about the busiest time when, you know, all the equipment's brought back and it's not out, you know, on the road, that's where there's sufficient space there to meet the current needs that go on along with these 24 plots.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, as I say, there is such a scarcity of land for showman's use. I'm using showman because that's just the term that is used by the community for showman's use. I've been in situations in Manchester where there's considerable pressure on land, which means a lot of overcrowding going on. I'm not expecting that to be the case here, but just to say that there is an acute need for this type of provision.
So if you have an opportunity with an authorised site such as this, and it's got sufficient space to put a residential, you know, use on as well as the storage and maintenance.
Indeed. And again, it's that flexibility, because very often you'll go onto a yard and there'll be, you know, a small number of caravans plus a load of equipment. The actual scale of equipment does vary according to the uses. This is obviously circus family, so they'll have particular things that they'll want storing and maintaining, etc.
Okay, thank you. Right, so understood about what your assessment of need is and what the provision is to make use of this site to meet that. So, Enbourne Parish Council, let's hear your perspective on all this.
So thank you, sir. So first of all, just to clarify that the red line area that I think you're looking at on that plan, that's absolutely not all currently used for the circus. So the site has a dual use, and those are agricultural fields currently. So they're not at all used for, it's just the purple area that's the circus yard. And just to quickly go back on what Michael Bullock just said there, that there was an intention to develop the land for residential use. I mean, that's not what it says in his 2021 GTAA. So our position is that the 2019 and 2021 GTAAs, which we have as the evidence for the need, absolutely do not conclude that there's a need for 24 plots. And I'll just very quickly read from the conclusion of those. There's no additional need for travelling show persons plots, but it's recommended that the existing yard is safeguarded for travelling show persons use. And our understanding is that the council position is that the recent assessments simply carry over the 2015 assessment of need.
I mean, so at that time, there may have been a need identified, whoever they spoke to that in 2015. But what you're saying is that there hasn't been anything subsequent to that to demonstrate that need
so
either materialising or still exists.
Yeah, so there was a need identified in 2015, which I'd like to just refer to in a minute. We don't think that Mr. Bullock intended to conclude that need still existed in 2021, because he says that there remains, and I'm quoting from paragraph 4.5 here of his report, there remains no intention to develop the land for residential use. It's just used as storage. And he would have been aware of the 2015 assessment and the fact that it relied on the site owner's testimony to establish the need for the 20 plots. We also think that had had he really intended to conclude that there was still a need for 24 plots, some 10 years, we're 10 years later now, he would have probably done some cross-boundary checks with the authority where these people were alleged to be resident. He would have looked at population growth over the revised plan period, because it was 20 plots in 2015 with an estimated growth of 4 up until effectively today. Well, if he was looking at it in 2021, he would have thought about, whether that that was still a relevant number. So there are really a number of really serious inconsistencies between these pieces of evidence. So our position is very simply that need is not there, and that the conclusions of his report that the existing yard should be safeguarded would have a very different red line boundary to the one that's proposed in RSA 25.
Okay, I'll come back to the assessment of need. In terms of the red line, where the council has drawn this red line boundary, does that reflect the 2001 planning permission? Or is this an extension to it to provide additional space, either for storage, maintenance, or residential?
So if I may, we have the benefit of the previous case officer for.
I can't hear, sorry.
Sorry, do you want to? Michael Butler is the case officer for Long Copse Farm back in 2001, I believe. So if you would prefer to hear from him.
So if anyone who can answer the question is welcome to contribute.
Yeah, coincidentally, sir, I was the case officer for that application. And I should stress, this is from memory, so it would need checking. It was allowed at appeal. That's the first thing to remember. My recollection is, and it's some time ago, that the red line boundary included a dual use, as the objectors say. So the intention or the permission at that time, and bearing in mind this is 23 years ago, was that the fields, part of the red line, were for the, should we say, the agricultural side of the operation. That's my recollection.
For the what side?
Agricultural side, it was a dual use.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen the plans because I'm not prepared for this question, but the purple hatched area, I believe, which you referred to, although I haven't seen it, was the principal area where the storage of travelling show people's yard was intended.
I think
That's my recollection.
rather than relying on, distant memories and
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
we
which is
need
not
we need to dig out
entirely satisfactory. I realise that. Yeah.
So I have actually
So
got,
wait one sec. When you talk about dual use, what are you talking about?
Again, my recollection, and I would have to check, the dual use was there was an agricultural element of the original permission. And part of the fields where they were used at that time for grazing stock.
But to do with the circus use, or they're just
Yeah.
separate?
You know, there was a mobile home there and they grazed stock on the fields to the
Okay.
west.
think what
But
we need is
I may not be helping because it is just,
No.
yeah.
I think if we can I'd just like to establish what is in effect a commitment, and it's being, the way Mr. Bullock's describing it is that it's making a good use, we'll come back to his assessment of need in a minute, of what is already something that is basically allowed, authorised. Yeah, sorry, Mbon. Yeah. Parish Council.
sorry, I congratulate Mr. Butler on his memory. The actual decision which granted the original consent, condition 2, no parking or storage of caravans, vehicles or equipment associated with the use of the land as a circus headquarters shall take place anywhere on the land other than those areas specified for the purposes on drawing number CM 17904B. We have here the plan that I think they were referring to, which identifies that area, which is the purple area there.
Yeah,
And
as far as I can see, I've got a purple area in my copy of the, but
Oh.
anyway, I know, I can see what I can see what it is, because from what you've just held up there, there's what looks like an access track goes in a number of buildings on the eastern side of the site.
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying, the planning permission tied the use to.
And I don't think I don't think that's contested by the site owner or the agent acting on their behalf, because they describe these areas as agricultural fields, you know, repeatedly, and you know that's what they've been used for. I don't think that's a point of, you know, I think we're agreed on that point. That's why they've just applied for a change of use. It's not.
That's why what, sorry?
Sorry, they've just applied planning permission for a change of use of that land from agricultural.
Recently?
fields. Yeah, so it's agreed that
Yeah, okay.
it's not currently in that use.
No, okay.
Yeah.
So the way that I should approach this in terms of this red line is that it encompasses an area that is in effect authorised for the Circus HQ and some residential use associated with it. The eastern part of it is,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, but the red line also includes more than half of it being not permitted for or the use of that being restricted by a condition on that area. Okay, right. So let's go back to the council in terms of, first of all, whether this need still exists, Mr. Bullock, based on, you know, as far as you can tell from your latest update.
Okay, I mean, it's interesting that the thought of finding out what the actual needs are over a wider geographical area, and I think it would result in some quite frightening figures. I think I go back to the point before that there's an acute need for showman's accommodation nationally. There was a site developed recently up in Lancashire where 20 plots were made available, and they were totally snapped up with people desperate to move on to them because there was just no availability. So there's an issue of strategic need at a national level, which needs to be met. And that is an underlying principle as to where this, which is why I was actually encouraged that within a local plan, there was a site allocation for particular showman's use, given the scale of strategic need nationally. So if we were to ask the Guild, we do liaise with the Guild, you know, as and when possible, though it's a bit flaky whether we get responses or not from them. But when we do speak to them, there's just this constant issue of there's a real pressure of demand nationally that needs to be met. So when it comes to the actual empirical evidence, because there is actually nobody there at the moment, there's nothing further than the observations and the discussions with the current site owner. But I've got no concern whatsoever in this forum to stress that there is such an acute need that I would be strongly advocating the development of the site to try and meet that strategic need that exists, bearing in mind that Zipper's Circus operates mainly in London, not exclusively. And so there is that intrinsic need that is very clear that we see nationally.
But this is, I think it's described as a family business. Is that correct? Zipper's Circus?
It is, yeah.
So what does that actually mean in practice in terms of who would occupy these 24 plots? Would they all people directly involved with that single circus use? Or when you're talking about strategic need, are you talking about this as something more strategic provision than that? Or is that, or strategic need, the context for this family needing its?
Yeah, I mean that I suppose it's too much of the strategic need. There's the need for the family units that are associated with that particular site. But there is that much wider strategic need for showman's accommodation anyway. What I don't know, if I'm honest, is the precise characteristics of the families that would be occupying those plots. I don't have that information. But what I do know is that the owner was very keen to be developing once the resources are available to do that. But it is quite a unique situation, this, in that there is land available for development, and all we are doing is rolling forward the evidence that identified that need for 24 plots. We weren't able to follow that up further, other than that the owner was wanting to do stuff but couldn't at that moment in time. But I've got the confidence, knowing as I do that the pressures that showmen are under, that site would be fully occupied.
So this particular, from what you know about Zippo Circus and the nature of this business, well, I'll come on to a separate issue, I suppose, but in terms of just that and what was known back in 2015, which was before they had this site authorised. Because you said the permission was 2000, oh no, they had this site authorised for a number of years. And in 2015, it was established that there were certain family members that were living elsewhere that at that time it was thought would be like to live on this site that had been in operation for 14 years or so. But what's been said is that no further updates been made to see if that's still the case.
No, there's no further.
But your position is, well, that would still be quite feasible, given the scale of this
I would have
operation.
confidence to know that, yeah.
That
Yeah, I
sort
would.
of size of family running this business would be quite normal.
Indeed,
Yeah,
indeed,
okay.
yeah.
Right. I think I've taken that probably. Anything else?
Nothing
On the-
Well, just to add that the planning application is currently live for the development of the 24.
Sorry, I can't.
Sorry, the planning application is currently live for the development of the 24 plots.
So there's a planning application in now,
Yes.
and so you could provide that to me, and you could provide the original planning permission in
Okay, yeah,
2001.
Absolutely, yeah, I can do that.
So this current application has a red line that's the same as in this plan.
I believe it does. The plots are west of the access road. So actually the red line includes a small section on the southeast corner, and that doesn't include any plots.
Okay, well, we can look at this anyway.
Yeah.
So, okay, right, understood. So, but going back to the original 2001, from what Emborne Parish Council have said, there was a more restrictive approach at that time, based on condition 2, as he read it out.
I need to get the details of that
Yeah.
2001.
Okay, right, okay, yeah, back to Emborne Parish Council.
So as I understand it, the evidence for the need is based on really the 2015 assessment. That's what seems to be being said. And that assessment was based on the sole testimony of the site owner. So I think it is relevant that, well, there's several things to say about that, but firstly, the fact that he's obviously not intending to develop the land raises a question about, in 2021, about whether or not you can reconcile those two things as giving that conclusion. The main thing that from Emborne's perspective, given that we've got obviously a long history with this site, is that the site allocation has been used in an attempt to obtain consent for alternative development on the site by the site owner. And that, in most people's minds, raises the very real prospect that his statements about his needs and the needs of travelling show people are being made for other reasons. So the 2015 assessment, in good faith, recorded his requirement for 20 plots, additional 20 plots. And subsequently, he's tried to obtain planning permission for a 5-bed house and granny annex instead, and the promise that if he was given permission for that, the alleged need for travelling show people would fall away. So there's really, from Emborne's perspective, and we've got now at least 63 people who will contribute to this, this will go further, is my point. We've got sufficient evidence to say that the evidence being presented is not robust and up to date.
The evidence of need.
Of need, absolutely.
Residential plots.
Absolutely, and Emborne, we want to, do our bit to support the need that Mr. Bullock, Dr. Bullock identifies. But it's 10 acres of land in a small rural parish, and it would have a outsized impact on us. And so the need is, it's really important to say that this is a need for this business, and incidentally, we understand that, you know, the site owner is now retired and doesn't run Zippo Circus. So, you know, there are lots of things that are raising concerns about what's going on.
If the need were proven to your satisfaction that this Zippo Circus, who's got a authorised headquarters here, had a need for 24 plots, would you have a concern about that, or is your concern that it's a Trojan horse for something else that is, which is the concern?
The main concern, the reason I'm sat here today is not to fight a planning application.
No.
It's because we're in the process of preparing a neighbourhood plan.
Yeah.
We've got lots of local people energised to put this together, and we're trying to make sure we've got robust arrangements. And this policy flies in the face of that. So what do we do with this 10 acres of land in the middle of the parish that, you know, could double the size of our population? Do we plan for it or not? The reason I'm sat here today is because we need to see the evidence of the need. If that came forward, then I think a lot of the reasonable objections would fall away. Because we understand that this is a plan-led approach, and we're trying to, you know, find sites, but the abuse of that allocation undermines the genuine needs of the travelling show people community, and I'm afraid, that's where we are.
But if this application, or for whatever it is, I can see it. If it were granted and it was strictly tied back to it's a, you know, they are plots for this particular business or for this particular authorised use, that's the best the planning system can do, is it not? I mean, when you talk about there's aims for alternative development, you're presumably thinking of other forms of housing development that.
Well, I mean, so the principle is the policy surely has to be based on robust and up-to-date evidence. So that's the first, the policy making. Proportionate.
Yeah.
But it has to be fairly robust. It can't just be, you know, I can't just say I need 100 houses on my land and apply for 100 houses, which is effectively what's happened here.
Well, I think Mr. Bullock might describe it a bit differently than that. I mean, I've asked him about the scale of this circus operation and what would typically be associated with the size of a family that may run that, and where you may reasonably expect those family members to live. And I think, well, we can elaborate on that a bit more. But I mean, I think I got the answer to that being that would be a reasonable ask, and that's within an overall context.
Well,
these types of travelling show people not having authorised places to live, not because this one would be provided for other families, but it would be a reasonable way of accommodating the family needs for this particular business. That's what he's telling me.
Well, he's presenting new evidence today, which obviously isn't what was said with respect, which wasn't what we've been looking at.
Understood. Yeah.
So,
well, hence my question to you: that if you know, if you were satisfied that need really did exist and it would be used in that way,
well, I wouldn't be sat here if we had a clear evidence of need.
So it's not the dispute about the principle. I mean, whether you like it or not, that's an authorised HQ for a circus.
I mean, look, you know, we're here surely to say, is the plan robust? Is it based on robust evidence? Is it up-to-date evidence? And is it proportionate? And the point we're making to you is that it's not based on an evidence of need, not at least from what we've seen. Now, we're not contesting that there may be a very dire need, as there is in housing and all other areas, for certain sorts of accommodation. But we're saying we're here because we're not seeing an evidence of need, and actually, no doubt with the best of intentions, the person who we would be engaging with, should we allow this allocation to proceed, has outstanding matters of planning enforcement. You know, planning inspectors have told him, take away unauthorised development. He's not done it. We have very little confidence that the usual ways, the conditions and things that might overcome those lingering concerns about the development, we've no confidence that they would be complied with. And we do have real concerns and other anecdotal evidence that there are other moves afoot. Now, that's obviously not relevant to this hearing, but I think that, you know, it's important to understand that context from Enborn's perspective.
Okay, understood. Okay, anything further you want to say in terms
Yes, I
of?
mean, I understand where I generally understand where you're coming from there. I really do. One thing, it's new evidence, and I'm not sure whether you want to hear it or not, sir, but there is actually the agent acting for the landowner, RPS Consulting, has given a narrative which kind of like reinforces what I've been saying, but provides some kind of up-to-date position on, you know, the thoughts around the development. Is it useful to just refer to that or not?
Well, this is from RPS, who
This
are
is
the
not-
agents.
yeah,
who may
you may
represent-
admit you may have seen it.
Well, no, I haven't seen it unless
Okay.
it was in their Reg 19 representation, which I think they did make a representation on behalf of Zippo's Circus.
Okay, so there's nothing further than that.
Is that what this
It's
is?
just it just comes to light as part of the preparation for this.
Yeah.
That there was a
But what we've-
paragraph
sorry.
which helpfully confirmed
Well,
my thoughts about it.
well, maybe Ms. Willett can just clarify. We're talking about something from the Reg 19 ref here.
No, it's part of the planning application.
It's part of the current planning
Yeah.
application. Okay, well, I think that I will ask for the previous planning application, the planning permission, and the current, the current planning application in terms of, I suppose, the application and any supporting information submitted with it. Nothing, I don't think, beyond that. Seems a sensible place to draw the line, because it's still live and no doubt there's things going on, but that would help to provide a bit of context. And so that would be available for people to look at, and if you've not seen it already,
I have, so I know if I could draw your attention in that that decision, the inspector refers to the character of the circus, and that the majority of the showmen are actually from overseas and come from Eastern Europe on a seasonal basis, arriving in February. And that characterization of the circus, which obviously doesn't sit with this site allocation, is also sort of reiterated in the 2020 application for a temporary consent to accommodate artists from Eastern Europe who were arriving but trapped because of COVID. So I think, you know, there's so much evidence that we've got, which we'd like to put to you, about the character of this situation, which doesn't reconcile with the best of intentions is being put to you.
I will leave that with me for now. I think what I will suggest is that the current planning application and the planning permission, the relevant documents for the planning permission, I don't need a great deal. I think the decision notice and probably the approved plans will be sufficient, and the current application and any support information that was submitted with it. But if you want to just briefly outline what this, you were just about to, before I sort of went off and
Yeah,
checked the
I'll
context.
happily just read through. It's just a paragraph to read. Just give an idea. Yeah. Okay. This is an email I have May 24 by the council from RPS Consulting. The applicant is a well-established business. Unlike other circuses, its performers and staff required secure, permanent bases for the storage of their equipment, and more particularly for residential purposes. Such bases are most occupied during the winter, when many show people will return with their caravans, vehicles, and equipment. For this reason, these sites traditionally have been referred to as winter quarters, with individual pitches generally referred to by show people as plots. However, increasingly show people's quarters are occupied by some members of the family permanently. Older family members may stay on site for most of the year, and there are plainly advantages in children living there all year to benefit from uninterrupted education. This is the ongoing need/demand for the proposed development, originally identified in the previous applications.
When it talks about previous applications, what's this is?
I believe that's for the temporary use of the land, the caravans in 2018 and 2020. Again, we can provide.
Well, I think maybe just leave that for now. I think I'll just start with this, what we've got. Okay, thank you. And in terms of if permission, well, sorry, two things before that. The policies map you referred to seem to go back to a previous designations from the site allocations DPD.
Yes.
What exactly was the site allocated for?
Well, it was still 24 plots, but I understand it's some. In the in the housing site allocations, we included quite a large landscape buffer around the western and the northern part of the site. And it included the area of ancient woodland as well, I believe.
So that's the thing that I was looking at, it's
Yeah.
a much larger area.
Yes, yeah. So we've taken out the landscape buffer, but that's been done across all
Yeah,
housing sites that are carried forward. But we'd still expect landscape.
so but the allocation, going back to the adopted plan, was for the Circus HQ along with 24 plots, is that correct?
Ultimately for the 24 plots.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Right, and that was, what was the date of that plan? 2017.
17.
So when we talked about this subsequent planning application 18, 19, or whatever they were after that.
They were after that, and a temporary solution pending the full application, which is now
Okay.
been submitted, yeah.
Anything else? Yeah, Enbon.
Sorry, so we did heavily contest that evidence at the time from 2015. But we weren't able to be heard at the time. The inspector, in other words, the inspector wasn't able to examine the soundness of that policy when it was adopted, TS2, with the benefit of our input, previous chairs of the parish council and so on. So that's,
Sorry, what do you mean? When you're saying that that previous policy adopted in 2017?
Yeah.
Based on the 2015 evidence then?
sorry, yeah.
Yeah, you're saying you didn't have an opportunity to input to that process?
So we tried to input into that process at the time because we've got, these really serious concerns about the integrity of that evidence, which this is all now based on again. But we attended the hearing, but we weren't able to be heard.
Because?
I can-
Well, you weren't. Okay. The fact is you weren't given the opportunity to talk at the time.
I think that the words were bewilderment and dismay at the outcome of that hearing. So the point is the inspector didn't have chance to hear, what we're now able to put in front of you. So, the fact that it was an adopted allocation doesn't mean that it was a sound.
Well, it does mean,
policy.
well, okay. Yeah, okay, I understand. But it is an adopted policy, but it isn't one that is saved. So this has happened a number of times. It is before me to consider as to be justified based on proportionate evidence, up to date, adequate proportionate evidence, which is what you're saying is you're not convinced about at all. Okay, I think I've probably taken it as far as I can today, but I think I will have a look at those other documents and I'll give it some thought. Anything else you want to say?
Well, I think it's just really that, we've been spent lots of time for this hearing, looking at the evidence that was put before you, and it doesn't stack up and it's not consistent with what's been said here today. So we're sort of wondering where we go with this really. But
Okay, well, I understand the doubts you have about the evidence of need. I suppose another way to think about this actually is to look at the wording of RSA 25, if we could just quickly. I don't know if you've read the actual policy. Given that you seem to express a concern that there may be whatever this policy proposes, i.e. it's a site for a Circus HQ with associated family accommodation, your concern may be, well, actually, it could end up being something else. And therefore, the wording in the policy, I suppose, is important in terms of how it sort of defines what the use is and what safeguards it has within this. Obviously, if permission were granted, there would be the ability for the council to stipulate conditions on that. Just, I mean, actually going back in terms of the use, is it a personal use to this particular business, or is it the 2001 permission, could it be used by a different circus?
I'd have to check, sir.
We can look at that one and look at the permission, but
Can I
yeah.
just point out that the current application isn't actually by Zippo Circus, it's by the site owner. Zippo Circus now allegedly is run by somebody else altogether. So I think, it's, to us, that seems really relevant that the need was established on the basis it was to do with the circus.
but, okay, this is for travelling show person's yard. It's not, this policy is for a
Yep.
travelling show person's yard. I've
Yep.
been told that that reflects a permission that was for a circus use going back a number of years. The definition of travelling show persons, I mean, there are definitions of that in the PPTS. There will be conditions of how to tie it. I think I'll work on the principle that that is what it is. It doesn't have to be Zippo's circus. Question then is, well, if that a travelling show person's yard, does it need 24 plots to go with it? That's your
Yeah.
point, i.e. Mr. Bullock saying, well, for this sort of sized operation for a travelling show person's yard of this sort of size, a circus, you think 24 plots wouldn't be unreasonable? That's what you're telling me. I think that's what you said, isn't it? A travelling show person's yard of this sort of scale, or of, you know, of what they typically are. I think what you've said to me is that 24 residential plots as part of that would not be an unreasonable or a disproportionate part of a mixed use. Yeah.
So sorry, sir. So what I'm understanding from what's being said is that whilst the council hasn't shown a specific need, there is a general strategic need for this, and this allocation addresses that need.
Well, that may be part of the argument. I mean, this is, you know, we are developing this, aren't we, as we discuss it, and it's given me plenty to think about. Yes, but that may be part of the case. I mean, I don't suppose the council's position is it's providing this just because there is a strategic need nationally for, you know, travelling show persons' yards.
No,
it is building on a identified business.
And that's the context for
Yeah.
the need
Yeah.
here, is that there's an acute need nationally.
Yes.
And so here, bearing in mind that there is an established, well-known business saying that they have a need, that context is relevant. And so in relation to RSA 25, can I also point out that the end of that policy says that the site shall only be occupied by those persons who meet the definition of travelling show people as outlined in the planning policy for traveller sites. There would be a condition or a legal agreement to ensure that.
Yeah. But if Zippo's circus changed its brand to someone else's circus, and if it were bought by someone else, I mean, those things go on, you know, and this plan is a plan for many years ahead. That's quite conceivable. This is for travelling show people's yard as defined in the PPTS, and the accommodation residential plots would be that as well. And you can, you know, there could be questions about how the council can enforce that and impose conditions, but that's the process and that's the proposal. But it isn't specific to, it's building on the fact that there's an existing long established business, but it isn't in the long term. It's explicitly tied to that particular those people. No. Okay. Right, thank you. That was helpful. I'll make a note of the documents, but I think you're clear about what it is I'd like to see, and then I can think about that more. So thank you, and thank you very much for both the contributions from the parish councils on this side. I think Aldermaston will be back again on another day for the AWE. Are you coming back for the?
No.
Well, we're doing it again because we've got a revised policy.
Yes.
You can't get too much of a good thing. I can't remember when are we talking about? Is it tomorrow, isn't it? Yeah. So if you are available, we are talking about the revised SP4. Right. Okay. And well, thank you. And if there's any further, you know, information or things that I need when I've looked about this, I'll let you know. So anyway, thank you. We're back again at 9:30 tomorrow. Thank you.